All right, Jack Payne is back after Ranchers for Trump and his big win. I feel like this is like part two, and you're a little bit clearer. Last time, I feel like I don't know, you were blurry. People can see you now. um, and so yeah, I guess the main thing I just wanted to have you on, and people have asked like, whatever happened about that rally? Because that was before the rally, and we were trying to get some steam build up there. And if you missed his um that last podcast, Jack grew up in Jordan Valley, no electricity, moved to a ranch in Fallon, married a gal there, and now runs a big ranch in Fallon, Nevada, and Jordan Valley, and runs Nevada livestock marketing. Um, but really, this one I felt like we just sit down and go over how the last few months have went. Um, and I guess to start with, how was election day?
Oh, I couldn't stand to even watch it because I knew I was just going to go crazy. We drove a bunch of cows up the mountain. We were out of service. I didn't get back to service that night till like 9 o'clock, and was hoping to be pleasantly surprised. The local TV deal here, well, Churchill County Communications, just like the week before the election, shut off everybody's like internet to their house. So we lost Fox News. So I'm basically watching on my phone, and I was scared to go to bed that night because I was afraid of what would happen last time. Kind of like the Super Bowl. Remember the memes on Facebook the next morning? It's like, oh yeah, the other team
Yeah.
got 3 touchdowns in the middle of the night and ended up winning the Super Bowl. So it was sure nice the next morning not to see that 11 million.
Yeah. Boy, yeah, and I think about that. Like you had a lot invested, I feel like, as far as cattle people. You were number one pushing for Trump. Can you imagine those people? I thought about that too on the election day. Those people that work on that campaign and watching them results come in. I could not imagine how stressful that is.
Yeah, I've talked to a lot of ranchers that said I just never dreamt he would win. I'm like, did were you one of those that didn't go vote because you didn't think you had a chance? And they're like, no, I voted, but I still didn't think he'd win.
He got Nevada, right?
Nevada,
Yeah,
yeah.
he got them all.
I think this whole election was really people just don't realize how much agriculture had to do with it. Oh,
Yeah, yeah.
because
That's what
everybody's starting to think more about their food source, I believe.
yeah, it definitely helped. And so you didn't even have service that day?
No,
Yeah, I got luckily I don't go and help very often, but they said we were preg checking that day, so I was like, yes, something to get me. I don't want to be around I want a
right.
good way away from everything.
I think I sent you a picture that day of the bull that had gotten away last couple of years.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was the day. Yeah.
Right. But to go back, I guess, the Trump rally. So last time we talked, we were, like I said, we were trying to push that. And then, so how did it go? I guess you can just tell the story. I guess to go back, we could start with you trying to work with the Trump campaign, and you can tell as much of that, I guess, as you want to. But how did that go?
That was very difficult. I was extremely disappointed in just how we were treated from the get go. And I don't think that it's the Trumps. I really just don't think that they would ever treat people the way that his campaign people treated us. They wouldn't respond to messages. We would send them like just to get the flyer approved, to get it out, to get people to know about it. Took a week, and finally we got the attorneys on the phone, and the guy's like, "I don't see anything wrong with this," but the campaign people had held us up a week just to get the poster approved. And then people were supposed to buy tickets. They were supposed to scan the QR code on the poster to buy their ticket to come to the rally, and turns out they had the minimum set at $500. So they had sent us the wrong link. And so, a gal was helping me. She called him up and chewed him out. She's like, no wonder the Democrats outraise you guys. They'll take $15 and you won't take less than 500. So they changed it. But by that time we were way into, we were way too far into it. And then they're like, well, you haven't hardly raised any money through your online thing. And I'm like, yeah, no kidding. At least now we know why.
Right. And that
Yeah.
was kind of, you worked with them to set the date, right?
Yeah, no, we didn't really work with them to set the date. We set the date really on when the fairgrounds was available because we had that big
Oh,
race for Trump, muley roping and team branding and girls
yeah.
breakaway and all that good stuff. So
Yeah, because I know some, they kind of felt like it was. a little bit. You didn't have much time to really. And then I'm sure people just scan that QR code, they see $500 and they're like, "Well, I'm not going." Right?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, how many people did that turn away?
Yeah, it was supposed to be set at a minimum of zero. I mean, you could donate $1 if you wanted to, and then
Right.
people could have gone on there and got their $100. So yeah, that was disappointing. They, thank God for Brooke Miller and Matt and Mercedes Slapp and Mr. Bernhardt came out. He was Secretary of Interior under Trump. He came out and spoke and did a great job. Um, so yeah, it turned out okay. We were just kind of expecting some kind of high profile. Don Jr. was here at the last one. We just sort of, I guess, assumed that they would send somebody like that, and didn't. So,
Why do you think that was? Like, what do you think there's reasoning behind being ignored or not getting the best service or
hard to tell. I've been pretty outspoken about my political views on not necessarily obviously on the presidential stuff, but on just the industry issues. And so I'm sure there's some people that don't want Jack Payne talking to someone close to the president, because I'm going to tell him the truth about mandatory ID. I'm going to tell him the truth about checkoff. I'm going to tell him the truth about the BLM and imported beef and fires and
right?
carbon credits and global warming and all the bullshit that we've gotten into this place where nothing even makes sense anymore. Like, we should just be raising beef and selling it for the highest price, and the consumer should be able to afford beef. But yet the ranchers are going broke, and the consumers can't afford the beef. So guess who's making the money in the middle?
Yeah. And so you just felt like somebody in there was maybe just trying to silence you almost.
And maybe not. Maybe they were just so absorbed with
Yeah.
win the campaign, and they thought, well, Churchill County is going to go for Trump anyway, so we're going to focus our attention somewhere else. I don't
Yeah.
want to be imagining that we were treated poorly for some other reason, but it felt weird.
Yeah, because you were
They were
trying so
gonna
hard.
Yeah, they wanted to send Christy Nome out here to be our speaker, and we kind of know where we stand on her. I mean, I'm pretty close to a lot of the ranchers from South Dakota, and they'll all tell you the same thing. She got so much credit for keeping South Dakota open during COVID, but it turns out it was her House and Senate that kept it open. She was going to close the state, but then as soon as it got to be popular with the media, then all of a sudden she's like, hey, that was me that did that.
Right. Yeah, and I guess we'll get into a little bit of the aftermath of the election, but and so for the rally, like you said, you got some good organizations, CPAC and Brooke Miller.
Mhm.
They came in and kind of helped you out. Corbett was there. You had your good real grassroots people, but as when it came to the campaign, they just didn't show up.
Yeah, that's what
Um,
it boiled down to.
yeah. And then yeah, and so all this has come out about how Kamala Harris has spent money and got, paid $10 million for Beyonce or Oprah or all these names that came out. She gave millions to, and
Mhm.
and yeah, but they made so much money, they just had enough to throw around, I guess.
What was the
Um,
deal with Trump? Was he just joking when he's like he had so much money left over he was gonna help Kamala with it
yeah,
with her?
I
What was
don't
that
know
about?
what that was, but
Rachel was
I,
sending that to me. She's like, this can't be real. She was mad.
yeah, that's what I thought too, and I said that on our deal with Shad. I was like, what about these people who contributed to Trump and now he's going to pay her bills with it? Like,
Yeah, that didn't happen, did it?
I don't have any, I don't know. I can't imagine. And
Hannity
was it
said
going to be, he was going to, I don't know. I don't have any idea. I just kind of heard it the same way you did. It got sent to me and I don't
yeah.
know.
Hannity said he was just like joking. I hope he was, because boy, that
Yeah.
would about pissing people off.
And that sounds like how a joke he would make.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, and so once you got everything, like after the rally, then you had more trouble, right?
Yeah, so we just thought that we would meet him somewhere and give him the money, and we're just simple handshake kind of people, and they're like, "Oh, you absolutely can't hand an envelope to the president or anybody like that. It's got to go through Secret Service and all that." So anyway, we ended up mailing that, which I did not want to do. I did not want to mail a check with $270,000 or an envelope with $270,000 in it to the campaign, clear across the country. And it
Right.
says right on the envelope, how easy would it be for them to just to run that through the shredder?
Right.
And then there's all my customers that donated $500 or $5,000 wondering what happened to their money. So we ended up mailing it priority mail. They wanted a copy of each individual check. So there was like over 100 checks in there. And then they wanted the tracking number and a picture of the envelope. So I sent all that. And they said, if you get that done, you'll come to New York, Madison Square Garden. You'll have 5 minutes at a round table with 6 other people to talk to Trump. I'm like, okay, done deal. So about 30 minutes after we send the envelope, we get a call back from the same campaign person that we'd had trouble with from the get go, and said, hey, we're going to send you to Vegas instead. And you'll be at the end of the photo line and you'll get 5 minutes with Mr. Trump then. So we're like, okay, we just took them for their word. And that was a lot closer than going to New York. So then my wife and kids went with us and we went to Vegas and got into the rally. It was great. Got in the photo line and he was a little bit late. We got up there. We had kind of suspected that something might happen. So we had wrote like a 12 bullet point, like 4 or 5 page letter, just talking about these things that you and I are discussing. And then we'd had one extra buckle made from the Ranchers for Trump roping. And so we wanted to give him that buckle and then give him that letter. And of course, Secret Service took the buckle and all that. And they just kind of shoved us through like cows with a hot shot in our butt to get the picture and out the other door. So I just asked afterwards, I'm like, hey, is the 5 minutes going to be like after the rally or whatever? And then this same lady that was so rude to us the whole time, she's like, what did you expect? And we can send your money back if you want. She was just real snotty. And I was like, it's not my money. It's our customers' money. I mean, 30,000 of it was my money, but the rest was customer money. And, all the people that donated hay and auction items. And anyway, it just felt weird to be treated that way and just to have them be so unappreciative. And I just thought if we could ever get to Trump or anybody in his family and they found out that the campaign people were like that, I think they would be extremely embarrassed.
Yeah.
It's just the gut feel I get about the Trumps and how they treat people and what I've
Yeah,
heard
everything you've heard.
from, right, employees to just down to earth people that have had dealings with them that say they're just very polite and nice and just not like that. So
Hmm.
anyway, that was our experience. But hey, in the end, he won, and now we're just on the edge of our seats waiting on this Secretary of Ag pick to see how that's going to turn out.
Right. Yeah, so you were at the rally and then you just got put in a line and so your picture you got, that was it, pretty much. You didn't even I mean, you shook his hand and said,
Yeah, I had on the Ranchers for Trump shirt, and he's like, "Oh,
right.
Ranchers for Trump, I like that." And then my son heard him say, he just said, beautiful family," and then they just shoved us on through. So
Yeah.
whatever.
But they told you before you'd get 5 minutes? Like when at that day did they tell you?
Yes.
Or
Yeah.
and then you got up there and it was just kind of to shut you up almost, huh?
Yeah, but there was a lot of people in the photo line behind us that didn't even get their photo taken. So he was late. So,
Yeah.
who knows? I don't want to be a whiner. I just kind of, when somebody
Right.
tells me something or I tell somebody something I'm going to do, I just kind of like, that's the way it's going to be.
Yeah, but I mean, for somebody like me and a lot of people who have watched you and all how much you put into this, and I don't think people realize at all how much you put into this, as far as putting that event together and all the
Yeah.
time you probably spent on the phone and all of that, and then just to get kind of shoved through it's disappointing.
Yeah, and
Uh,
it's not so much the financial, it cost us a lot of money, but what it really cost us now is like time. Now we've got cows that we're supposed to get, several feet of snow this week. We got cows that should have been out of there. I should have been gathering cows and shipping, not screwing around down here getting ready for a Trump rally. So
Right.
we probably never will know what that Trump rally cost us, but damn, it feels good that he won. So
Yeah,
can you
it was
imagine,
all worth it in the
spending
end,
all
huh?
that money and all that time and getting yourself a month behind in the busiest time of year and then have him lose? I was scared of myself and just how depressed I was going to be if he lost.
Yeah, I thought the same thing. And we've talked to a lot of people and even like the day after the election, I got some orders that I hadn't got for a long time. I talked to, well, Eric, who we both know, Eric Groper. He told me he usually sells Colts and he hadn't hardly got any interest. And the week after the election, he all of a sudden had interest and in selling and people wanting to buy horses. And I think it just kind of it gave people some confidence for the future who were looking at how things were going to turn out. And so,
Yeah, it just takes a weight off your shoulders. I was talking to a gentleman in Oregon that owns a feed store up there and fencing supply and all kinds of stuff. And he said when we have a Democrat for a president, everybody just goes into lockdown mode, like they're just scared to move, you know. And he said, you get a Republican president, people go whatever money they make, they put it right back into the ranch, you know.
Yeah, consumer confidence. I feel like it's kind of undervalued thing,
And you know how
especially
ranchers are, they spend every dollar they make. They don't
right.
save money; they put it right back in, you know.
Yeah,
Tire troughs and new fences and
yeah.
trailers and new tractors, and you know.
And it goes back to like what we were just talking about, the campaign money. I mean, imagine if that was your president he spent $1 billion and is 20 million in debt and all the stupid things she spent money on. Like, definitely, we can complain about Trump's campaign and the issues you had, but we still definitely dodged a bullet with that with
Can you
that
imagine what
deal.
the stock market would be or the cattle market? Like, I don't even want to think.
Yeah,
You know, we sell cattle here based off of commission. So, you know, market goes up, we make more.
right,
Um, we could be back to $800 steers if she'd have won
right.
or less. Like, look at the price caps that they did in the 70s. They said cattle went from 86 cents to 38 cents.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
real. I don't
right.
think
Yeah. There
all
was no, yeah, yeah, there was no option,
these
really.
ranchers that say cattle are higher under a Democrat than they are a Republican. Like, yeah, well, this lady wasn't a Democrat.
Yeah. Have you have you had any contact at all with anybody as far as with the campaign or the Trump team or any of that?
Yeah, some of the guys that I've worked with through the rally, you know, have reached out to me, but we're just so behind now trying to catch up for the month we
Yeah.
lost that I've kind of just gone back into, I've ignored a lot of messages and just got back to work, you know.
Yeah, I've been trying to get you to sit down for a couple weeks, like since election, I think. And what are we, 2 week, are we
Yeah,
3 weeks out now? Almost 3 weeks, I think.
yeah. I just been
Um,
drunk and celebrating, basically. That's all I've done.
yeah, right. Every time I text you, I told Chad this too. I was like, you ever talk to him on the phone and there's always cattle banging around in the background and you giving directions while you're talking to me and I don't think you sit down for much more than an hour at a time. So thanks for sitting down, finally
Yeah,
getting
absolutely.
there. And so where do you see things going from here, I guess?
Well, I'm pretty optimistic. I mean, I guess what I think's going to happen and what I want to happen are probably two different things. But what I want to happen is that Trump takes a look at imports and says, "Hey, like he said in that 2020 press release when he was talking to Zippy Duvall and Sonny Perdue and the NCBA president, he turned around and looked at him and said, "I want you to look at stopping imports. We've got a lot of cattle right here." And that's where we need to get back to. We don't have a lot of cattle right here now because everybody's gone broke. But you look at this federal land that is not being used and all the fires and all the decadent fuel out there that's just these perennial plants are just getting ranker and ranker and dying out because they're not being used. And so what I hope, I was not pleased with the Secretary of Interior pick, just was hoping for, you know, a Harriet Hageman or somebody or like Mr. Bernhardt, just somebody that really gets it and is pro grazing. You know, Bern maybe is great on fuel or on petroleum and drilling, but we were just hoping for somebody really on our team, you know. But maybe Bergen will just be kind of behind the scenes and or the face of it, and the guys that know what's going on will be running the show. I hope, but what I'm hoping happens is that we slow down imports and he increases grazing in the West, and we regionalize packing to where all these cattle aren't going to these big four plants and then back through Walmart and Tyson. We hope that there's more farm to plate, and in order to get farm to plate, USDA is going to have to back off on these mom and pop um, plants. You know, like my sister-in-law in Reno, you know, she doesn't know which end of the cow the hay goes in, but she can sell ice cubes to Eskimos. And she was selling grass-fed beef to all these customers that she would meet in a church parking lot somewhere. And she was selling these 40-pound boxes of beef. And so she was getting people coming up from California, from Sacramento, from clear down to Vegas, coming to Reno to pick up beef. But all that beef had to be USDA inspected. And during COVID, you know, the big four, they saw all this talk about buy local. And so they had their friends at NCBA go to USDA and say, hey, we got to get these mom and pop butcher shops shut down, or everybody's going to start buying local. So they shut down the local plants here and wouldn't let them process USDA because they found a fly speck, or they just invented something to shut them down for, And all those customers that were buying those 40-pound boxes of Nevada beef, they had to go back to Walmart. They had to go back to Costco. There's very few people that can afford to buy a whole cow or have a freezer big enough to hold a whole cow. So, the big four's plan worked. They forced all those people to buy from them again. That's got to be fixed.
Right. Yeah. And to go back, like, just to elaborate, I guess the Prime Act is the main thing that would open up kind of the small lockers. It would take away all these regulations, and it's easy to complain about NCBA because they are lobbying against that happening.
Yeah.
They are. You can find it on their website. They are against the Prime Act happening.
And Jim, tell me, why would they lobby against beef being able to be processed in your local community?
Right.
Who would be paying them to do that?
Exactly. I mean, it just goes to show there's a lot of things if you really look, and it doesn't take much looking to figure out how they operate.
We were
Um,
pretty nice to NCBA in our last podcast, but the truth is, you got to stop listening to what your dad's telling you, or your uncle, or your buddy, and just look for yourself. It's
yeah.
not you don't have to be that smart. I'm not very smart, and I can see what the hell's going on. Like, if it's good for the producer, they're against it. If it's bad for the producer, they're for it. Just look and then use some common sense, and you can see, these guys aren't working for the producer.
Yeah. And that's their number one issue too, as more and more information becomes available and it becomes easier and easier to look this stuff up. They're having more and more problems.
Yeah, these little things right here,
Yeah.
they're a pain in the
Right.
ass, and they're ruining our country in a way, but they're also probably what saved our country. I bet these cell phones is what allowed Trump to win, because people are
Yeah.
getting their source of news from other sources like Joe Rogan
Yeah.
and you and podcasts, and it's not
Right.
all coming from CNN.
Yeah. From you right now.
Yeah, the tinfoil hat on.
So, the so you said you knew the last Secretary of Interior?
I didn't know him until this rally we just had. He came and spoke.
And where's he from?
He's from Colorado originally.
Okay.
David Bernhardt,
Uh-huh.
and just super smart. Like,
Did he think he had a shot at this time?
I don't know that he wanted to be. I didn't ask
Yeah.
specifically. Like I didn't hear, but I'm he's. I guarantee you, he's part of call it the transition team.
Hmm.
Part of. I don't know what the terminology would be, but I promise you, he's definitely heavily influence the next 4 years of how the BLM. One of the things that he mentioned was, we need monuments, and when you hear monument as a rancher, your hair stands up, And he said, we need monuments for ranching. He said, people have heritage in ranching as well. We have all these heritage foundations and all this stuff for these different things. People have been raising beef here for 200 years. How much more heritage do you get than that?
Right.
A lot of this ground's best use is raising cattle. And raising cattle and sage grouse and antelope and deer and all that, they run together. They work better together. Go to the Sheldon Wildlife Refuge or the Antelope Refuge, or up there at Hart Mountain. All those have burnt this summer. The wildlife's all gone, and the wildlife has all moved over across the fence to where they're still running cows. Back to just the common sense. All you got to do is walk up and look, and there's antelope over there mingling with the cows, and over here you've got just yellow dead grass, looks like stale bread, and there's nothing. There's not a bird, there's not an antelope, there's not a deer.
Yeah. And so I guess just to explain, Secretary of Interior is in charge of BLM land. Um, and I guess how often do you talk to BLM, Bureau of Land Management, if you don't know, and that they manage all public lands?
In Nevada, it's daily. At my ranch in Idaho, haven't heard from them in 2 years. But the ones in Nevada say, well, it's the law. We got to do this and we got to do that. I'm like, okay. So you're either really following the law, or the other states aren't following the law, or you're just harassing me because you want to,
Is that typical, you think, of ranchers, or is it you?
I don't know. The problem with our ranch is just big and it's not fenced. but yet the BLM has all these little cute imaginary boundaries that cows are supposed to know about. And the water trough they've been drinking at is 200 yards down the side of this little ridge. And now on September 1st, this cow is supposed to know that she can't go drink out of that trough anymore. And so she's supposed to go 2 miles the other way and get a drink. Well, it's a cow. She's going to go wherever the heck she wants. So you either got to eliminate all your little cute rotations that they've dreamed up over the years, or you've got to fence them. And a lot of this country you can't fence without flying a helicopter in there with the material because it's just too steep and rocky. So the best, the ranchers aren't going to go overgrazing their ranch and nuking one area and letting the other area get overgrown. The rancher's going to move his cattle around and use the areas that need to be used and try to let the other areas rest so that it looks good or he has feed to come back to next year. What they need to do is just get the heck out of our way and let us do our thing. Let us develop water in those areas that need it. Let us build reservoirs. Where I grew up in the 80s, they come in and built reservoirs, and now you go in there, there's all these willows on the dams, and there's ducks everywhere, and they've planted fish in them, and there's tons of wildlife around there. Your hunters are setting up blinds there for hunting, and the BLM come along during the Clinton years, and we're going to remove those dams and take them out because it was allowing cattle to use areas. And what it was also allowing, it was keeping cattle off the creek. You have all the riparian areas and the stream bank trampling, and they're always concerned about that. So, but it was like working too good. The BLM wasn't able to kick my parents off of that allotment because cows were not coming back to the creek. And so they were going to go in and remove the reservoirs. I mean, how silly does that seem?
Have you ever had a anyone at the BLM ask you your opinion on anything?
Not really, no.
Have you ever heard of them doing that to a rancher?
Yeah, I mean, there's great people in the BLM. I mean, the guy that I work with is a great guy. He would love to do stuff to help us. I got zero complaints about my range tech, range con, whatever you want to call him. He comes out and wants to help build fence and do stuff, but his hands are tied. He can't do anything because of the red tape. We've been waiting on approval through the state office in Nevada for months for prescribed grazing on a pasture that we've rested for going on 3 years now. That we were supposed to graze last year. They didn't get it approved. We're supposed to graze it this fall. That didn't get approved. So it's like, I don't know. It's just red tape. It's crazy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like, isn't Nevada like 3/4 BLM land?
87% federal land.
87%. So, yeah, more than that.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't think a lot of people have no idea of how that really works. And, like you lease the land from BLM, right? When you're running cattle? Or how does
Well,
that
it's not
work?
really, yeah, I guess you could call it a lease. They call it a permit, but these
That
allotments
you
were,
pay for?
yeah, we pay for it. But Nevada is interesting because we have water rights. The BLM doesn't own the water. We own the water. And then you have so many acres around the water that is like, it's kind of treated like private property, but it's not. You could get into the weeds on the BLM stuff like really deep. And there's tons of different, like if you follow the Hage case, a guy named Danny Martinez, wrote his book on it. It's really interesting. That stuff's way over my head. I just know that we have pre-existing rights that your newer BLM folks like to ignore. They just like to pretend like everything started with the Taylor Grazing Act, but that's not the truth. Most ranchers just try to get along and they can't afford to fight. Once you get in a fight with them, then things get really ugly. So you're better off just to try to work with them than you are to get in a legal battle. But at some point, they drive you far enough against the wall that you finally got to fight.
Yeah, I guess to get into fight. I was just as listening to you talk, I was like, do you know Ammon Bundy?
I don't know them personally. I sure know who they are, obviously.
Yeah. How far away from you was that deal?
They're way down south. They're clear down there by
Okay.
Vegas. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Um, and so how much hope, I guess this kind of ties into your campaign contribution and who has say and who has all that. This Doug Borgum, who I just found out, if you follow Lonesome Lands, I did a video talking to Trent Luce, who's very familiar with North Dakota, and Doug Borgum is now Secretary of Interior and in charge of all the BLM. And he uh, puts on it, he wears a cowboy hat and all that, but where he made all his money was he sold his business to Bill Gates and Microsoft for $1.1 billion. And now he's in charge of this So now he's in charge of BLM land. I guess
Why?
do you have much hope as far as how things could change?
It just makes me sick that Trump would do that. Like we fought for him, we fought
Hmm.
hard for him, and so it's a real slap in our face to put somebody that would do that. I mean, I would never sell to Bill Gates at any price,
Right. Yeah.
personally.
And they were a friend. Like, I mean, what Trent said is like after he sold his company, they still worked together and Bill Gates was in North Dakota, like would visit him
Mhm.
and all that stuff.
Yeah. So
Hopefully they didn't go off to any islands together or anything like that.
right. Oh, I don't know. I don't know. I just can't even wrap my head around the pick. I just hope that in Secretary of Interior he doesn't pick another Sonny Perdue or somebody like that.
Yeah, for ag, but like
You heard
what?
anything? Like Massey was supposed to be we got the word and then haven't heard anything since then. Have you heard anything?
No, I mean, just new names keep popping up.
Right.
And I think the thought is now that because that got leaked, it kind of ruined his chances.
Jeez.
Um, which I don't, I think that's all just kind of rumor and innuendo because of how long it's been. And every
Right.
other pick seems to have been, I mean, all the major cabinet picks have happened, it seems like. And so
Yeah.
now we just sitting and waiting. And why is it that we're sitting and waiting? But if they could fix what's going on with BLM land, what would it like? What would the best thing to be? Just work with ranchers more and not make all the rules.
Yeah. And just do what it needs to be done. If a pasture needs to be grazed in, like this pasture that I'm talking about, it always got overused because it was close and easy, and the Indian rice grass had pretty much died out in there. And so we had a really good winter and a really wet spring, and so that Indian rice grass just came back like crazy. There was more Indian rice grass plants out there than I'd ever dreamt. So I just voluntarily didn't use it. I didn't even tell the BLM. I wanted to just rest it and let it go to seed. And then I wanted to come in there in the fall when those seeds were still alive and then graze it to push those seeds in it, because that Indian rice grass seeds are little tiny, tiny seeds, but they need to be pushed down in the ground pretty deep to get germinated. So I was like, well, let's wait for some fall moisture or even winter and put a bunch of cattle in there. So I went to the BLM and suggested that, and my guy's like, hey, that's a great idea. We'll get the paperwork done. And now here we are going on 3 years. So there's been no cows in there for 3 years, all because I voluntarily wanted to do the right thing for that pasture. See, so you just get to the point where like, well, no point even bringing it up. I guess I'll just go on and graze those plants off, even though they needed rested.
Yeah.
So it just give you this bad attitude of trying to do the right thing, you get punished for it. And so that's
Yeah.
just one example. They just need flexibility. This targeted grade. Trump did the executive orders in 2018 for fuel reduction, and that's 6 years ago, and we've never got one of our uh, fuel reduction plans approved. They're supposed to like graze in linear strips along a road or a fence to try to make a fire break, and it's all just common sense stuff. But you cannot get the paperwork done.
Yeah. Did you see that? I interviewed a gal from California. She runs another media website. And she just actually today on Real Clear Politics, you can watch her documentary. I wish I could remember what name was. Murder something. But she talks about how on BLM land in California, or just public lands in California, they're setting up all these illegal weed grows. Have you heard about that?
No.
Yeah, she said that ranchers will go in there and they'll stumble across an area that's like clear cut. They use herbicides and pesticides to kill everything off, and then they're growing weed in there, and selling weed on marijuana on the black market. And she said ranchers have been escorted out at gunpoint. This is Northern California, so you don't
Yeah,
have any of that.
that's been going on for 20 years. I think I got
Oh
friends
yeah,
that
she talked about that. She said she had a name for the people. They were like the hippie type of people, but now she said it's cartels. And she
absolutely.
said Chinese cartels,
Hmm.
illegal immigrants, and then they'll bring people in that are practically, it sounded like slaves because they have, no, they come over illegally and they have no way of doing anything and they get kind of captured and put up there and forced to work at these places.
Yeah, and then I
Um,
think they also hold their families hostage wherever they came from. Like
right.
you
Yeah.
work, You work for free or we'll kill your family. Can you? I don't know. It's
Yeah,
America.
that's
That crap's not supposed to be happening here, you know?
yeah, and that's exact. And when she was telling me all that, I was remembering how you talked about how if your cattle are one day late on you have to use a helicopter because you have to get everything moved on a certain time on your land, and then over there they've just clear cutting land to grow weed, and nobody even cares.
Yeah.
Um, but there's no, you don't have any illegal weed set up in your public land, huh?
Actually, we have, yeah. The White
You
Horse
found,
Ranch. Yeah, I haven't specifically found it. I found one that I found out later was my employee. So I was why is there this black poly pipe running down this creek? And it like his little screening system was like an old Folgers coffee can and it had holes punched in it, and this black pipe was in there, and you could tell he'd heated the end of that black pipe and shoved something in it to make it like blossom out where it would stay inside the coffee can. And I kept asking him, "What are you doing over there at the Middle Fork?" And he's like, "Oh, I'm working on that fence." I'm like, "Damn, that fence doesn't go that many miles." I mean, he had a well-beaten path over there, and a couple of his, he called them brothers, had just showed up, but they were like tall, skinny guys, and he was about 5 foot tall. I got a picture of him right here. He was a cool. His name was Wado. He's back in Mexico now, but
oh,
he was a cowboy, and but he had been in
was this
prison.
for personal use or he was selling it?
No, I think when those guys showed up, they were, they probably had a plan way before they came to work for me, They
Oh,
had a whole plan all along. But anyway, it was up there in the Middle Fork of the Owyhee River and just the craziest place that nobody ever goes. We don't even run cattle in this one section because cattle can't get through there. It's overgrown. And some hikers just happened to be hiking down through there and stumbled onto their grow. And so anyway, they got arrested and deported, and yeah. But anyway,
so
yeah.
they
So
stumbled onto all this weed and then they called the cops?
yeah, they didn't have it planted yet. They had like these little Dixie cups, and but yeah, but that's just one of several. There's been lots of them in that country that grow it. And
Yeah.
same on our ranch in Nevada up there in what they call the dens. I guess they found a grow up in there. Hunters stumbled onto it. And then on that White Horse Ranch, I think there was, some cattle rustling going on, or suspected cattle rustling, or somebody was in trouble with the bank. And so they told, reported a bunch of stolen cattle or something. Anyway, they were flying around on that ranch up there looking for these stolen cattle, and stumbled onto a couple of big marijuana grows. So they got the sheriff and went back, and these, of course, cartel guys, they had guns, and one of them jumped in I think it was one of the ranch's dump trucks or something, and took off, but he didn't know how to release the brakes. And so he caught the truck on fire. And I think they only caught a couple of them. I think the rest of them got away. But yeah, they'd had a dead bighorn sheep was hanging there in a cave next to their grow. And, they're just living like,
Yeah, that's kind of sounds like what she talked about. They just come in and kill everything and then they're kind of just living off the land in there
mm-hmm.
and taking care of that stuff. It's
Yeah, and that's why one of the reasons I'm so against the mandatory animal ID. And people will be like, "Well, if you were running the number of cattle you're supposed to, and if you're running them where you're supposed to, you wouldn't be worried." I'm like, "Yeah, well, come look at my ranch, look at the country, and then the no fence issue, and all they got to do is fly a drone, or eventually it'd be a satellite, and you've got 4 cows over here, and we told you a week ago about those 4 cows, so now." You get too many violations, they just take your permit. Now your ranch that you paid 10 million for is worth nothing.
yeah. And yeah, so pretty much everything, your ranch value all kind of it's all depends on that BLM permit.
Right,
I
because
think yeah, and
your
a lot
private
of
property has
people,
a value, but it becomes a lot less valuable if it doesn't have the BLM allotment to go with it.
right.
So
And
like right now,
so
the Navy's coming in and taking a bunch of our land in eminent domain, a bunch of our private property, which is right in the middle of our BLM. So now we're going to have this allotment that we have nowhere to gather to, nowhere to camp. They're taking 439 acres of our private property in eminent domain for a Navy expansion. They're not even going to be bombing there or anything. They're just taking it for a buffer zone, they say.
and how did that go? Did they just send you a letter and say we're taking it? I mean,
Yeah.
and here's your price?
Well, now we're in negotiations on that price. They're wanting us to come up with an appraised value of what it's worth. It's got a lot of artesian springs and wells on it, and it's big old ponds. People love to go hunting there. And it's not that it's that great of grazing land. It's just private property. We have the right. I can leave my horse there overnight. If I got a cow that's in violation on the outside of the fence, I can put her inside the fence and I'm no longer in violation. What is that worth? I mean,
Right.
it's what would private land be worth if all of your state was federal and
Right.
in the middle of 200,000 acres of federal land, you own 439 acres of private. What is that private property worth? They're going to try to say it's worth $100 an acre, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. And you had a road going through there, you said, that you won't
Yeah,
be
we
able to
have
use
a
anymore?
there, a camp and a big barn, and it's a ranch, you know?
Yeah. That was another thing. You said you were talking about EID, and I think you were telling me about Nevada, a head tax. I feel like people should know more about that because it goes into that EID talk of control. And I don't think most states have this head tax because I was pretty unfamiliar with it. But how's it work?
Yeah, I don't think any state that I know of has a head tax. Nevada has a head tax, so we pay our brand inspection fee, we pay our checkoff fee, and then they just assess you a tax on so much per cow, so much per horse, so much for mule, so much for your goat. And I don't even know we need to audit the head tax and see how that's being used or misused. I've been told that it is partly for predator control. And I can promise you there's never been any predator control by the state on my ranch. Um, Maybe the people that are in charge of that are getting the coyotes killed on their ranch or the horses removed or whatever, but they're sure not getting it done on everybody's place. So there needs to be an audit on that head tax and just see how it's being used. If they want to take the head tax and tie it to the number of buttons we're using for bangs vaccinating, the ranchers of Nevada need to push back and say, well, if you want to audit us on how many cows we own and how many bangs clips we've ordered, maybe we need to audit you on how you're using our money.
Yeah, and so that's where you got into it because they're asking because you have to ask for a certain number of bangs tags for your heifers, and if it's off from your head tax,
Right.
then
They're
and
cross
they're
referencing.
looking at that.
Yeah, they're the state of Nevada is cross referencing the number of buttons ordered. So first off, they will not let your vet order the buttons. The rancher has to order the buttons. And that way the state of Nevada can get your premise ID number, which, a lot of people don't want the state of Nevada to know everything about their operation. I'm not saying that they're asking you whether you have a garden or not, but I know that on USDA surveys, there's the question of, do you have a garden? It's none of your flipping business if I got a garden, If here you are, like we're going back to the weed thing, you're letting them grow weed. What about that garden?
Yeah.
But you're going to ask a family that lives in the middle of nowhere if they're raising zucchini? It's just insane to me what our government's gotten to, and how many people just think it's okay.
Right.
Uh, so yeah, they're cross-referencing. So you can't order your buttons unless you got a premise ID number. Now they know everything about you, and then the rancher orders the buttons. The state is cross-referencing that to the number of cows you have on your head tax and the number of heifers. I don't know how they know what percentage of calf crop you're going to have. I mean, this is Nevada. There's dry years where you have a 60% calf crop and wet years where you have a 90%. So I guess they're just saying there must just be using an average of 90 or 85% wean calf crop or something like that to come up with that number. And I know one particular ranch that had ordered too many and were told that they had to come in and pay head tax and explain why they had lied on their head tax. Well, they had sold cows because of drought and they had less heifers. They ordered the number of buttons that they had in heifers. And then the state accuses them of that. So I just think that Nevada's drawn the blueprint for the IRS. And then the next it'll be the cow fart tax.
Right. And yeah, and all these people who think that electronic ID isn't about,
Control.
control and private property and private information, all that kind of stuff. I mean, that's that's quite the example.
Nevada was doing this before the November 5th rule even kicked in because people I'm talking to are calling me freaking out that they can't get their vet can't get the buttons and that they have to get the buttons. So now I've got ranchers hauling their cattle into my sale barn and banging them under my premise ID and then hauling them home because they don't want to give the state or the feds their premise ID number.
Yeah.
It's just crazy. And then you got a lot of ranchers that are going to stop bangs vaccinating. So now they've gone backwards. I mean, Nevada's so concerned about bangs, but now they're forcing their producers who don't want their cows to be tracked by the government to stop bangs vaccinating.
Yeah.
They're
Well,
counter with their regulations.
and the sale barn is in charge of collecting, right?
Collecting what?
The head tax.
No, ranchers are supposed to pay their head tax themselves.
Okay.
But it used to be all, it'd come in the mail. You got a form, you filled it out, and you sent a check back. Now they've gone all online to where our older customers that don't have computers and don't have email, they can't pay their head tax. So they'll come in here, and then on this computer, the brand department has everything's all computerized now. Here it says, this person's in the black, this person's gray. If you're in the gray, it means you're in violation. You either haven't paid your brand inspection fees, you haven't renewed your brand, or you haven't paid your head tax. So then that older gentleman will come in the sale barn in the office to get the check from my wife. And she has to tell him, "Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Jones, you can't have your check today because you haven't paid your head tax." And he's like, "Well, I used to get a letter in the mail and now I don't get one." And she's like, "Yeah, it's all computerized and automated." And he's like, "Well, I don't have a computer." So then my wife has to take our company credit card, get online, fill out his head tax for him, pay the state with our credit card, and then deduct it out of his check in order to get the brand department to release his cattle check.
Yeah. And
That's my point. We got to collect the check off. We got to collect the head tax. We got to collect the brand. Now we're in charge of making sure everybody's heifers are banked. And then once they get this mandatory ID deal through on all classes, we'll be in charge of tagging all your steers.
yeah.
It's too much. It's not right.
Right. And yeah, and you get no compensation for all that extra,
No, but
like
you
all
will
the
get,
work that,
yeah, you will get fined. The sale barn in South Dakota who had all those feeder cows just recently, right after the November 5th rule, but they hadn't gotten him the buttons yet. He said, "I got all these feeder cows that just sold here on Tuesday, I guess. And then on Wednesday, they couldn't ship them because they didn't have the buttons." He said, "Well, I'm going to put the old Silver Brights in them so I can get them shipped to the feedlot." And they said, "If you do, it's a $250,000 fine
for not having the ID.
for not having an ID, but the state had not sent him or his vet any new IDs. So they just had his hands tied.
So are you EIDing now?
We're yeah. So the way it works, any cow who's leaving here, crossing state lines, not going to slaughter, but going to a feedlot or somewhere, has to be ID'd. If she already has her old bangs clip or a replacement clip, you can't put a button in her because now she's got two identities.
Okay.
So any cow that already has an ID, that's hers for life, unless it falls out. Then any cow who was a non-vac who was never banged or lost her bangs clip, her replacement now is an orange. I'm sorry, a button.
Yeah.
And then on the heifer calves, we're not using the old orange bangs clips anymore. Now it has to be a button. And I don't understand. We got all these different colors. Bangs is supposed to be orange, and they do make an orange button for bangs. Now we got cattle coming in with whites, yellows, greens, oranges.
Well, it's all so much easier now because you just run your reader past it, right?
Yeah, yeah. So look at that.
I know.
So you've got heifers that go into a pen that got bangs before November 5th with an orange clip in her ear, and then you got heifers in there that got bangs after November 5th that have the orange button. You still got to run them through the chute because you got to read all those others. And the same with cows. We're not going to get to a spot where every cow has an ID, an electric ID for 10 years from now. So
Yeah.
how is this new system going to be better? So what they're going to have to do? They're going to have to go read the brands on the cow, which is exactly what our point is. You already have identification. Just read the brands.
Right. So I
They're
guess.
hard to make sure that this foot and mouth deal. Like when you listen to the NCBA guys, like you can almost hear it in their voice that they want there to be foot and mouth. And if foot and mouth was introduced, think about it. Who would it benefit?
Yeah.
It would the cattle market, which would help the packing industry, and NCBA would get their long cherished mandatory ID through because, well, when you talk to them, they say it's not a matter of if we're going to have a disease outbreak, it's a matter of when.
Right.
And if you're so worried about it, why are you letting all this imported beef pour across the border from countries that we know have foot and mouth?
That's why they have to say that because that's what they're allowing. That's what they've pushed for years is to relax all these import regulations. And now it's just a matter of when.
Yeah, it's a matter of when. So
Yeah.
don't tell me how worried you are about disease traceability in foot and mouth when you're not doing anything about stopping the imported beef. Start there. And then if that doesn't work, then we can sit down and talk about tracing disease.
Exactly. All right. So you're a big Trump campaign insider, so you get to pick the next ag secretary. Who's it going to be?
Well, there's a lot of good choices out there. I always lean towards Massey because of the Prime Act. It was interesting. You and Shad talked about it with him being a congressional rebel and a bad choice or whatever they said. Um, like I always say, you can tell a lot more about someone by their enemies than you can their friends. And
Right,
so, if Farm Bureau and NCBA are coming out against Massey, then I love him. He's the
right.
man I want for the job. Um,
Yeah,
Sid
and all
Miller
this.
keeps coming up. I don't know anything about Sid Miller. Maybe he'd be great. Brooke Miller, he was past president of the United States Cattlemen's Association. Very smart man, very well connected, a doctor. Um, he'd be great because he understands both sides of this deal, not just the beef side, but the health benefits of beef going over. And I think he'd be a great partner with RFK
Yeah,
on that side.
right.
So if if I had the choice to pick somebody, like right now, I would pick Dr. Miller probably over Massey because number one, we have a closer relationship with him and we can talk to him.
Yeah, that's what I said. Anybody whose phone number I got.
Right.
But the thing with Massey, like all the stuff we've just talked about, except for like the BLM, but EID,
Mm-hmm.
NCBA, he was wanted to reform the checkoff. He's been against all the lobbyists, all that stuff. He's the number one. He's the guy who raises cattle and says he is not putting an EID tag in his cattle. So
Mm-hmm.
that just all that stuff, I just feel like, and the other thing is he's smart enough to understand how to make all this work. To make the
Isn't he like,
changes.
like he's
Go ahead.
like Rain smart, isn't he? Like,
Oh yeah, he's like genius smart. Like MIT's the toughest technical school to get into, and he has 2 degrees from there.
yeah,
If you've ever seen like Goodwill Hunting, where they put this impossible equation on the blackboard, and no one can solve it at the university. That's MIT.
yeah.
Which is the reason they use that university, is because that's the where the smartest mathematical minds are.
So you're saying that he has common sense and he's smart?
Yeah, I know.
I didn't know
He's
they made that.
a true unicorn, I guess.
You're right. Yeah. So anyway, well, I hope, even if Brooke Miller doesn't get to be Secretary of Agriculture, gets a very important role in this
Right.
administration.
Yeah, and he's right down the road in Virginia anyway. So,
Mhm. He's an Angus producer
right.
and sure and a doctor and big in the carnivore diet. He was one of the first ones to come out, the anti-vax stuff.
Right.
And we know that he's not bought off. That's the biggest thing I have with all these politicians. I just don't trust any of them because I just don't know who's in their pocket.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
That's
why
the
we love
main.
Trump. We know he doesn't need their money.
Right. Yeah. And the main concern with your Secretary of Interior now. Um, but all right, Brooke Miller, good possibility he'll be a guest soon on here, so we'll see what
Good.
he has to say.
Yeah.
But okay, Jack, thanks a lot for coming back on and filling us all in on how that deal went, and we'll talk to you soon. My goal is to someday be out there and we can sit next to each other for one of these deals, have a clear camera on you, and so people can see what you look like,
Good.
um, and show your ranch and everything. But that's a someday
Well,
someday
you better
wish.
schedule a week because
What's that?
you better schedule a whole week, because a booze cruise on our outfit takes a little bit more than an hour or two.
Yeah,
So we
right.
take flat tires and
Well, we can take the helicopter.
yeah. Well, we'll have to schedule your trip around that.
All right, buddy.
Great.
See ya.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
See ya.